Chapter 19 of Ronicky Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Rowdy Delaney, Idaho, USA. Ronicky Doone by Max Brand. Chapter 19. Stacked Cards. The game opened slowly. The first, second, and third hands were won by Jerry Smith. He tucked away his chips with a smile of satisfaction, as if the three hands were significant of the whole progress of the game. But Ronicky Doone pocketed his losses without either smile or sneer. He had played too often in games in the West which ran to high prices. Miners had come in with their belts loaded with dust, eager to bet the entire sum of their winnings at once. Ranchers, fat with the profits of a good sale of cattle, had wagered the whole amount in a single evening. As far as large losses and large gains were concerned, Ronicky Doone was ready to handle the bets of anyone other than millionaires without a smile or a wince. The trouble with McKeever was that he was playing the game too closely. Long before, it had been a maxim of the chief that a good gambler should only lose by a small margin. That maxim McKeever, playing for the first time for what he felt were important stakes in the eyes of Fernand, followed too closely. Stacking the cards with the adeptness which years of practice had given him, he never raised the amount of his opponent's hand beyond his own order. A pair was beaten by a pair, three of a kind was simply beaten by three of a kind of a higher order. And when a full house was permitted by his expert dealing to appear to excite the other gamblers, he himself indulged in no more than a superior grade of three of a kind. Half a dozen times these coincidences happened without calling for any distrust on the part of Ronicky Doone, but eventually he began to think. Steady training enabled his eyes to do what the eyes of an ordinary man could not achieve. And while to Jerry Smith all that happened in the deals of McKeever was the height of correctness, Ronicky Doone, at the seventh deal, awakened to the fact that something was wrong. He hardly dared to allow himself to think of anything for a time, but waited and watched, hoping against hope that Jerry Smith himself would discover the fraud which was being perpetrated on them. But Jerry Smith maintained a bland interest in the game. He had won between $200 and $300, and these winnings had been allowed by McKeever to accumulate in little runs, here and there. For nothing encourages a gambler towards reckless betting so much as a few series of high hands. He then begins to believe that he can tell, by some mysterious feeling inside, that one good hand presages another. Jerry Smith had not been brought to the point where he was willing to plunge, but he was very close to it. McKeever was gathering the youngster in the hollow of his hand, and Ronicky Doone, fully aware of all that was happening, felt a gathering rage accumulate in him. There was something doubly horrible in this cheating in this place. Ronicky set his teeth and watched. Plainly he was the chosen victim. The winnings of Jerry Smith were carefully balanced against the losses of Ronicky Doone. Hatred for this smooth-faced McKeever was waxing in him, and hatred in Ronicky Doone meant battle. An interruption came to him from the side. It came in the form of a brief rustling of silk, like the stir of wind, and then Ruth Tolliver's coppery hair and green eyes were before him, Ruth Tolliver in an evening gown and wonderful to look at. Ronicky Doone indulged himself with staring eyes as he rose to greet her. This, then, was her chosen work under the regime of John Mark. It was as a gambler that she was great. The uneasy fire in her eyes, the same fire that he had seen in Western gold camps, in Western gaming houses, and the delicate, nervous fingers took on a new meaning to him. That she had won heavily this evening he saw at once. The dangerous and impalpable flush of the gamester was on her face, and behind it burned a glow and radiance. She looked as if, having defeated men by the coolness of her wits and the favor of luck, she had begun to think that she could now outguess the world. Two men trailed behind her, stirring uneasily about when she paused at Ronicky's alcove table. "You found the place so soon?" she asked. "How's your luck?" "Not nearly as good tonight as yours." "Oh, I can't help winning. Every card I touch turns to gold this evening. I think I have the formula for it." "Tell me, then," said Ronicky quickly enough, for there was just a shadow of a backward nod of her head. "Just step aside. I'll spoil Mr. McKeever's game for him, I'm afraid." Ronicky excused himself with a nod to the other two and followed the girl into the next room. "I have bad news," she whispered instantly, "but keep smiling. Laugh if you can. The two men with me I don't know. They may be his spies for all I can tell. Ronicky Doone, John Mark is out for you. Why in heaven's name are you interfering with Caroline Smith and her affairs? It will be your death, I promise you. John Mark has arrived and has placed men around the house. Ronicky Doone, he means business. Help yourself if you can. I'm unable to lift a hand for you. If I were you I should leave, and I should leave at once. Laugh, Ronicky Doone." He obeyed, laughing until tears were glittering in his eyes, until the girl laughed with him. "Good," she whispered. "Good bye, Ronicky, and good luck." He watched her going, saw the smiles of the two men as they greeted her again and closed in beside her, and watched the light flash on her shoulders as she shrugged away some shadow from her mind, perhaps the small care she had given about him. But no matter how cold-hearted she might be, how thoroughly in tune with this hard, bright world of New York, she at least was generous and had courage. Who could tell how much she risked by giving him that warning? Ronicky went back to his place at the table, still laughing in apparent enjoyment of the jest he had just heard. He saw McKeever's ferret-like glance of interrogation and distrust, a thief's distrust of an honest man, but Ronicky's good nature did not falter in outward seeming for an instant. He swept up his hand, bet 100 with apparently foolish recklessness on 3 sevens, and then had to buy fresh chips from McKeever. The coming of the girl seemed to have completely upset his equilibrium as a gambler; certainly it made him bet with the recklessness of a madman. And Frederic Fernand, glancing in from time to time, watched the demolition of Ronicky's pile of chips with growing complacence. Ronicky Doone had allowed himself to take heed of the room about him, and Frederic Fernand liked him for it. His beautiful rooms were pearls cast before swine, so far as most of his visitors were concerned. A moment later Ronicky had risen, went toward the wall, and drew a dagger from its sheath. It was a full 12 inches in length, that blade, and it came to a point drawn out thinner than the eye could follow. The end was merely a long glint of light. As for Ronicky Doone, he cried out in surprise and then sat down, balancing the weapon in his hand and looking down at it with the silent happiness of a child with a satisfying toy. Frederic Fernand was observing him. There was something remarkably likable in young Doone, he decided. No matter what John Mark said, no matter if John Mark was a genius in reading the characters of men, every genius could make a mistake. This, no doubt, was one of John Mark's mistakes. There was the free and careless thoughtlessness of a boy about this young fellow, and though he glanced down the glimmering blade of the weapon with a sort of sinister joy, Frederic Fernand did not greatly care. There was more to admire in the workmanship of the hilt than in 1,000 such blades, but a Westerner would have his eye on the useful part of the thing. "How much do you think that's worth?" asked McKeever. "Dunno," said Ronicky. "That's good steel." He tried the point, then snapped it under his thumbnail, and a little shiver of a ringing sound reached as far as Frederic Fernand. Then he saw Ronicky suddenly lean a little across the table, pointing toward the hand in which McKeever held the pack, ready for the deal. McKeever shook his head and gripped the pack more closely. "Do you suspect me of crooked work?" asked McKeever. He pushed back his chair. Fernand, studying his lieutenant in this crisis, approved of him thoroughly. He himself was in a quandary. Westerners fight, and a fight would be most embarrassing. "Do you think," began McKeever, "I think you'll keep that hand and that same pack of cards on the table till I've looked it over," said Ronicky Doone. "I've dropped a cold 1,000 to you, and you're winning it with stacked